Just waiting for it to go live. Good morning. Good morning. It's Charmaine Hammond, and I'm here today with Teresa de Grosbois, one of my dear friends and my mentor. I learned how to create best-selling books because of Teresa. So you are in store for some amazing information today. Let me just start off by welcoming you to the webinar. I'll introduce Teresa, and then we're going to dive right in. We've got a lot of content to cover. There is a chat box that you can see, and I see people coming on live. Good morning, good morning. You know, put in the chat box where you're calling from. I'm in California today, so I won't tell you how warm it is. Where are you, Teresa?
Yeah, I'm at home in Calgary, and you're glad you're in California. Okay. Let me just say that. And I'm jealous. I'm happy to be heading to Costa Rica in a couple days, I guess.
I bet.
Yeah.
So we have Liberty saying beats coming indeed, LOL.
Hi, Liberty.
So you've got a chat box. You can type your comments and questions in there. I'm going to be manning the chat box as we go through our time together and forwarding the questions to Teresa. I'll just say them out loud so all of you can hear the questions that are coming in, the comments. And the other part we wanted to talk about is this is being recorded. So we'll send you the link after. You can listen to it as many times as you want. You can share it with other people. It'll be on YouTube as well. So let me introduce myself real quick, and we're going to talk about Teresa. Charmaine Hammond, of course, is my name, and I am a professional speaker. I speak corporately on topics about leadership, team building, and resilience. And the reason I became an author actually was because of our dog, Toby. He was a dog with many issues and a dog who changed my life. And I wrote a book, not knowing how to write a book, not knowing how to market a book, not knowing how to sell a book. And fortunately for me, I met Teresa in that time. And that book became a bestseller. We're going to talk about that story later because it's just way too funny. But that's how I launched into the author world. I now have 5 books, best-selling books. I'm featured in 6 others. And I have the wonderful opportunity to speak to audiences around the world and work with authors to help them create a book around their business. Now, Teresa, I've been friends with Teresa for many years, and we've shared the same stages. That was actually how I met Teresa. I was at an event that she was speaking at, and her name kept coming in front of me everywhere I went. Teresa de Grosbois, do you know Teresa? And then I got to meet her and see her speak, and she was talking about how to build mass influence. And then we continued to stay in touch. I watched the hundreds and hundreds of authors that she helped their books go to bestseller status. Many of them are my friends and colleagues. Teresa speaks around the globe. She is a multi-best-selling author and has a brand new book out called Mass Influence, and it's a must-read. It really, really supports what you're going to learn about today. And Teresa's the founder of the Evolutionary Business Council. You'll hear us say EBC, and that's what we're referring to, the Evolutionary Business Council. And I see online some of the EBC members are here. Woohoo, EBC! And now let me bring you on. Teresa, welcome, and thank you so much for coming to talk to us about creating your bestseller in 2016.
Oh, it's just a thrill to be here, Charmaine. I love calls like this where we can keep it a bit informal and take questions as they come in.
Yes.
So I'm actually looking forward to this one. And I'll just vulnerably admit, technology is not always your friend. For whatever reason, the chat board is not live on my end. I can't see the chat board. So if questions come in or people have stuff they want to ask during the call, I'll get you to just interrupt me, Char, and tell me what the questions are. That'd be great.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Okay. So do you want me to just dive right in?
Yeah, let's get you to dive right in. I've got some questions that
put my eyes on.
Yeah, put your eyes on, put that PowerPoint up, and we'll rock and roll it.
Okay, let's start. I'm just going to screen share here, and we've got a PowerPoint that we'll sort of use to help guide the talk. But you know, the other thing I really want to acknowledge is that Charmaine, you have a lot of knowledge in this area as well. You know, it was a long time ago that I was mentoring you, and now you're often giving me a lot of advice and a lot of tips around the whole book world. So I'm also going to invite you to jump in and add your knowledge on some of these areas. So can you see my slides okay right now?
I can. Yes, and every time I talk, of course, the slides will come off, so you get to see my smiling face. So I'm not going to talk too much while Teresa.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're going to basically cover the gamut, the goal being to give you a really good sense of the world of best-selling author and how it works. So we're going to talk about, how do you get that book finished? What are publishers looking for? What makes a best-selling book? How many books do you have to sell? That's probably the top question I get from people. And how do you get all those top authorities in your field endorsing your book? So let me see. I just want to make sure I do this, that it doesn't mess up the screen sharing.
Perfect.
Okay. So let's talk first about how do you get that book finished? And, this is a question I often ask people who do a lot of writing in terms of what are their secrets. And I have certain things that are consistently told to me back. And so this is what I share with my students. First and foremost, write every day. Get in the habit of writing. And one thing that's really important to notice, most people are most creative either first thing in the morning or last thing at night. There's a lot of research on this that show the creative brain is most active at those times. And it'll be different for every person. So if you haven't figured this out for yourself, try either getting up in the morning and writing right away, or try writing just before you go to bed and see where your flow tends to come out more. For me, it's definitely first thing in the morning. My friends always laugh at me because one of my favorite things to do early in the morning, I often keep my laptop within arm's reach of the bed because I'll get up and I'll pull my laptop into bed and I'll just start writing at 5 a.m. In fact, some of my closest friends always laugh because if they Skype me early in the morning, they know they're getting me in bed and I'll be sitting there writing. So even if you come into some kind of habit where you do it every day, also a lot of research shows that most people are most creative, or the creative brain is most active when you're lying down. Go figure, right? So if you're having writer's block, and one of the reasons I love writing in bed is when the blocks come up, lie down and let your mind wander for a minute or two, and you will find that usually the creative part of your brain kicks in and unblocks you and starts giving you all kinds of options for moving forward. In fact, sometimes they come so fast and furious you can't write fast enough. So another really important element of getting your book finished that a lot of the top experts use is to blog your book. And even if you write one blog post every day, your followers will tell you what the best content is. There's a simple way you tell what gets shared, what gets commented on, and what gets discussed the most. So it's easy to pick out your best blog posts from how the response is from your readership. And when you go through and pull out 30 or 40 of those blog posts and weave that content together, you've got the foundations in the making of a really great book. Most blog posts are a page or two long. A book only needs to be 120 to 150 pages these days. Actually, shorter books are selling better these days. That's one of the reasons I kept Mass Influence pretty short and to the point. Was because the 300-page business books are not getting picked up by publishers. They're not getting picked up by distributors because they're not selling nearly as well. The exception being if you're a well-known author, of course your work will get picked up no matter what length you write. If you're Malcolm Gladwell, you can do whatever the heck you want because you have several of the top best-selling books of all time in the business realm. But if you're new and you're just starting out, look at what tends to work. And what tends to work is actually a shorter book. So blogging your book is a great place to start. Char, is there anything you want to add on that regard?
I'm going to add something that you and I talked about actually when I started writing on Toby's terms. So that's going back probably 6 years. And I was struggling to write. I found that my moments of no motivation, not even lack of, no motivation to write, and writing started becoming a chore. And you had shared with me a lot of the tips that you just shared now. And then you said something to me that really caught my attention. And you asked me how I share stories with people. And I said, I speak. I'm a speaker and I share stories through my speaking. And so I went home and I was talking to Chris and I thought that was a really curious, Chris is my husband, really curious question. And he said, Char, you're a speaker. He said, you speak better than you write. Why don't you talk your book? And so he went out and bought me this recorder. It's called a H4, and it's made by Zoom, and it's, I don't know, about this big, and it records in studio. And so I just walked around my office talking, sharing the stories, relating the content that I wanted to put in my book. Then I sent those audios to a transcriptionist for a very, very low cost. She transcribed them into a Word document, so then I could go through the process of editing and moving content around. But what was interesting for me on that, Teresa, is when I sent the book to my editor, Elizabeth, she said, Charmaine, what's going on here? Something is very different in your writing. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, after chapter 8, something beautiful happens. There's emotion. There's this feeling of raw authenticity. And the first part of the book feels a little bit, what was the word? It just didn't feel authentic. That's what she was trying to get at. She said, whatever you're doing for the second part of the book, keep doing it. And that's how I wrote Bounce Forward as well, which was one of my self-published books. And so I think it's what you're really getting at, Teresa, is finding what works for you. If early morning is great for Teresa, and for me, I get my energy at 10 o'clock at night. I mean, I wish I didn't have that. I'd rather be so pay attention to the mentors in your world. Like when Teresa asked me that question, how do you share stories? That changed everything for me and how I got the book done.
Yeah, and I mean, just remember, the more you write, the better you will get at it. You know, there's a reason people like Seth Godin write every day, right? And it's not just to maintain his following, but one of the reasons Seth Godin's writing is so brilliant and so beautiful is because he does write every day. So, you know, really encourage yourself. If you do nothing more than journal every day, but keep the writing juices flowing and your book will get done. Another really big question that I get asked a lot in this regard in terms of getting the book finished is, should I do a multi-speaker book? And, you know, there's a lot of different opinions in the industry on whether or not multi-speaker books are a good idea. And what I'm talking about is often they're a pay-to-play model where multiple people go into the same book and then they put the book on the bestseller list and all of them claim bestseller author status. And there's usually one or two big name people in the book, so they can say they co-authored a book with those big name people. And while I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad idea, it's not the best idea. And by that, I mean, it's not wrong to do that, especially if you're really slammed with time or you're really tight on resources. But by the same token, usually for the same amount of effort, you can achieve your own book. And the level of credibility and credential you get from having your own book relative to a multi-speaker book is night and day. It's, you know, significantly more credibility and credential from having a best-selling book that you're the solo author or a co-author of than one that you're, you know, one of 12 authors of. And so I just want to offer you the paradigm that if you're thinking you need other people in the book with you, it's fine to be the solo author of a book and just go out and interview 4 of your most influential mentors and do chapters in the book. You know, those of you who read Mass Influence know that I have an interview in there from Randy Gage and an interview in there from Shonda Perrin, because those are 2 of the people that have influenced me the most. And in terms of some of the concepts of influence, they teach them better than I do, or what I've learned from them. Let me put it that way. And so it felt right to have interviews with both of them, and that, you know, they each took up 3-4 pages of the book, which, you know, added to the page count, less work I have to do. And all I needed to do was get on the phone with them for 20 minutes, do an interview, get it transcribed and clean it up. In fact, there's also an interview with John DeMartini in my book, right? But those are all people that have significantly influenced me. Notice it's not a multi-speaker book, but it adds credibility to my book that some of the icons in the industry are interviewed in the book. And it also got those people endorsing and behind the book. So I know I'm going to speak to endorsements a little bit more later, but it's a way you can gift influence to other people that you're deeply inspired by, is to interview them for your book. Now, I would make sure that the bulk of the content is still yours. You know, 60 to 70% of the content should still be authored by you. But if there's gaps in the book or places you don't know, feel free to use interviews as a way to tie the whole book cohesively together and to add more content. And it's very simple and very quick to achieve that. All you need is a good transcriber, and you can hire that off Odesk or Elance if you want. So Now, I just want to double check if there's any questions coming up around that or anything on the chat boards or anything you want to add, Char. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next one.
There are
okay.
actually.
Awesome.
So we've got some hellos. We have Callie from, I think I'm saying it right, Callie or Kaylee. I apologize if I've got the name wrong, from Seattle. And we have Andre from Romania. Wow, you win the prize for the farthest away guest, I think, today.
Wow, beautiful.
And then Denise, who says she's a SoCal girl, just like you, Charmaine. And then, of course, we got Liberty from Calgary. And then Joe has a comment here, Teresa. Joe says, I completely agree. I did short essays, which added more value to my second expanded edition of Frock Off. And I just want to say, Joanne Dibley is a friend of both Teresa and I, and her book, Frock Off, F-R-O-C-K. I always spell that out for people. Yeah. It's just amazing. Frock Off, Living Undisguised. And I agree with you on that as well.
Yeah. Actually, I want to comment on Joe's book for a minute. Hey, Joe, it's great to see you on the chat boards. Because one of the things people ask me is, like, what are publishers looking for? What makes a really great book? Because, you know, let me speak to this, because, you know, publishers are looking for two things. The first is they're looking for a really high quality book. And whether it's a publisher or the public, that's what everyone's looking for, a really high quality book. And if you haven't read Frock Off, go read Frock Off, because it's a great example of what makes an awesome book. It is one of the most vulnerable tell-alls of what makes a powerful leader. Because if you've ever met Joanne Dibley is the former leader for all of eWomen Network for Canada, and just an amazing powerhouse of a woman. You only have to meet Jo to know how incredible she is, and how much she has invested in growing other women leaders. And this book really talks about, you know, Jo survived one of the most horrific childhoods you'll ever read about, and it's just a beautiful example of how adversity can really, you know, it's like the forge that really builds the steel into something beautiful and useful. It really is a deeply inspiring book. And so I'd highly recommend, you know, if you want to look at examples of how to just, you know, vulnerably tell your own story of what makes an awesome leader. Because a lot of people, you know, a lot of us walk around with this paradigm that leaders have to be perfect. And if I'm not perfect, there's no way I could be a leader. And it's that inner dialogue. I talk about this a lot in Mass Influence. It's that inner dialogue that gets in the way of you stepping up and really being successful as a writer or speaker or trainer. And, you know, the reality is the only people that aren't hardwired with a lot of that inner conversation that stops them from becoming really successful are, in fact, sociopaths. So you really need to learn and master the skill of overcoming that negative self-talk. And Frock Off is just a beautiful, beautiful example of going through that journey. So if you wanted just a great read over the holidays too, that'll get you inspired to get your own book written in a really powerful way, I'd highly recommend you pick up a copy of that book, because it's such a great example of what we're talking about.
Awesome. And Joe says, it's awesome to be here. Thank you. And then we have a great comment from Andre in Romania, said that the comment is, I just finished a book in 48 days. Woohoo!
Wow, way to go, Andre.
Now, writing 2 pages every day, no exception. Wow, that's phenomenal. And I'm watching this webinar to know how to market my book. And so any help is appreciated. We'll absolutely be giving you some tips on that. And Callie, if I'm saying it correctly, is a great question here. She said, what can be easily used for speaking our story and dictating it? So here's what I suggest. When I first started dictating, I used Dragon Speak. And you can actually download the Dragon Speak software onto your phone. I don't know about you, but I'll be driving along and something will inspire me, and I'm at the red light and I start talking into my phone. In the old days, I used to call my voicemail and leave myself a message. But Dragon Speak, actually, you talk into your computer and it translates it into a Word document. So that's a very low cost. I think the program's $140. All you need is your computer and the software. That's one part that's great.
And you know, the newest versions of Word have dictation built into them. In fact, if you own a Macintosh, the dictation features are built right into a Macintosh. So just go in the help section and learn how to use them. And most smartphones now have dozens of apps that you can download that will create dictation, and you just email the recording to yourself and send it off to a transcriber, and you're done.
Yep.
So yeah,
very cost effective.
Yeah, really cost effective.
And okay. Then I had another comment from Marcia. So happy that you're suggesting interviews. That's exactly what I'll be doing with the book that I start next week. Way to go.
Beautiful. I know the holidays are a great time to start your book, because usually things slow down on business. I know several people that wrote an entire book over the week between Christmas and New Year's. So it can be done. All of them are now international best-selling books. You know, if you've got negative self-talk saying there's no way I can do that, get up early or stay up late and do 2 hours of writing every day, and you can do a book in a week. I kid you not, if you really don't get in your own way and allow yourself to be in the flow. Okay, so I'm going to screen share again here just so we can go back to the slides. Sorry, it's going to be messy for a minute. And okay, so we touched on this briefly, but what are the two main things publishers are looking for in a book? So the first I just talked about with Joanne Dibley's book, which is a really great book. The second is that they want to know that you have the ability to help them market a book. A lot of people live on this false paradigm that it's the publisher's job to market your book, and you can just write the book and you know, then you become like Beatrix Potter, and you can just retire to the country and live off your royalties. And that paradigm of book publishing went out with the internet. As soon as the internet came online, the whole game of publishing and how publishing works changed. What publishers are really looking for is not only how much reach do you have, but how well connected are you to other influential people. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later when we talk about endorsements. But it's really your relationships with all those other influential people that become important when it comes to launching your book. And so, you know, one of the reasons that I talk about influence a lot in the context of helping people, especially those of you who are teaching transformational content, because I know you guys get that I'm a stand for really helping thought leaders step into their own influence and step into thought leadership more powerfully. You know, I really want you to get how important it is to be in community with other influential leaders. In fact, it's one of the reasons Charmaine and I do the Global Influence Summit, the next one coming up in San Diego in February, is, you know, it's not only an event to teach speakers, trainers, and authors and writers how to powerfully step into influence. It's an event where they can all come and meet each other, because we want you to get into community. We want you to find those people that you really resonate with, those people whose work you really admire, so that you can start helping each other become more influential. One of the keys to influence is that you can't make yourself famous. You can't make yourself influential. You need other influential people to do that for you. So guess what? You're doing it for them. And this is one of the key things publishers are going to be looking for. How well connected are you? One of the key things you want to have in any book proposal that you send to a publisher is details on how big of a launch you can pull off. They'll want to see names of people who are supporting your launch and how big their reaches are. Mm-hmm. So, you know, one of the reasons we created the EBC as a powerful entity and do these big Global Influence Summit and EBC retreat events, and that's a single event, by the way. The Global Influence Summit is being done in partnership with the EBC retreat. Is so that you can actually build solid, congruent relationships with people you deeply respect and admire. And Char, are there any questions or comments on that, or anything you want to add?
No new ones, but I think this is a great time to actually share how influence kind of goes back to Andre's question about the book written now, really looking forward to marketing. What you've said, Teresa, around influence and having many, many people behind your book is so critical. So let's share the day I became a bestseller.
Okay.
So let's paint the stage. I've written a book, learning how to write it as I go. Fortunately for me, I had a great publisher who just downloaded her experience as an author of 28 books. And she's also a professional speaker, now a publisher. She helped me learn sort of the world of publishing and the books. And Teresa was helping me learn how to create a bestseller launch for my book. So we had the launch scheduled for Jeepers. I think it was 4 months away So still in the future. And with the Evolutionary Business Council, I don't know if you remember this part, Teresa, but when we were at the EBC retreat, the very first one in Calgary, I had just received several boxes of books from my publisher to go out and test with people before we went to final print. So I gave all of the Evolutionary Business Council members a book, and they all went home with the book. And Facebook the next day, well, actually over the next few weeks, but the next day it was, everywhere was on Toby's terms. And Teresa calls me the very next day. And what did you say to me, Teresa?
I think I said, "Are you sitting down?" And you're like, "Why?" I'm like, "Well, you're already sitting at #1 on Amazon." And I think that's such a great example. And the example actually predates that. And because I really want to tell the whole story, because it wasn't just you giving out the books to all the EBC members. It was you giving to the EBC members, and those of you who know Charmaine Hammond know what I'm talking about, because I know there's a number of EBC members listening on the call. But Charmaine is such a contributor. She helps so many people. She's always shouting people out, endorsing them, offering to help on their book launches. Charmaine is a total giver. And when Charmaine stood up at the EBC retreat and said, "I need some support with my launch," every single person in the room put their hand up and said, "Hell yes. Of course we'll support you." And so what really happened was the launch was scheduled for 5-6 weeks out. People loved Charmaine so much that they couldn't shut up about her freaking book. They all went home and started taking photos. And, the launch, nobody even had copy yet, but they were all so excited to create the pre-chatter about the launch that the book went bestseller before it was launched. Yeah. It went bestseller in pre-sales. And I've seen that happen several times, and it always happens with people who are very generous in their relationships, people who really get where influence comes from.
Right.
You can't, because a word of mouth, a best-selling book is just a word of mouth epidemic around your book. It's 200 influential people all talking about your book at the same time. Well, you want to get 200 influential people talking about your book at the same time. First of all, you got to meet them, which is why we do events like the Global Influence Summit, so you can meet people that can help you. But secondly, you've got to get really generous to those people and those people that you authentically respect and admire. There's nothing smarmy about this, right? You want to find people that you really do love, but you just start helping them. Because then when it comes time for you to launch your book, you've got an army of people that are just waiting there to help you. I'm still deeply humbled by what happened with the launch of Mass Influence. Not only did it go hit #1 in all of the English-speaking countries, most of them within hours of the book launching. It started going bestseller in like Germany and France and Italy. It's like, I don't even know anyone in Italy. How does your book go bestseller in a country where you don't even know anyone, right? But it was because of, and many of you listening on the call, like, really, thank you. I get a little teary-eyed when I talk about it, because I get that was your gift to me because of the relationship that we're in. And when you get influence, it's as easy as breathing. It really is, because it's so joyful and so lovely to do. All you got to do is go find people that you love, whose work is awesome, and become their first raving fan. And nothing could feel more downstream or more natural than that. And when publishers see that you get that game, publishers will clamor to look at your book. I actually, I chose to self-publish Mass Influence, not because I didn't have several publishers looking at it, but because I didn't like the way the publishers wanted to launch it. I didn't like the game that they were putting in front of me, so I chose to keep control. But if you want to play the game of having a publisher pick up your book, it's nothing more than, it's the same as, you want to get drafted to the NHL, show that you're a great hockey player, show that you get the game of influence, and publishers will happily look at you.
Yeah. I'm going to add something that happened with your book, and actually with all of our books, this has happened. It has to do with the importance of influence and relationships, which is what you're talking about right now. When each of my books, when we did a launch and each of them hit bestseller, part of what the energy, the collaboration, our partners, all the influencers that were sharing all the information about my book, part of what that inspired was a whole bunch of media starting to call me because they were seeing all these people on Twitter talking about Charmaine, talking about the book. And then I had a number of media outlets contact us through Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest, actually, which I'm not very active on at all. And that's the other advantage, back to Andre's question about launching a book and how do we make it a bestseller. Those relationships and influence not only build the bestseller, but it inspires media. It inspires people to come and have you speak at their events. So there's just so much value with what Teresa's talking about right now. And there's a comment that just came in from Andre. It says, I wrote the book in English because I want to share to the world, the whole world actually. And I think the chosen topic will really help millions. And so you ladies know how to do it. And I'm really looking and getting coaching with you. I love the fact, I want to comment on this, how you said it will help millions. Teresa, you've heard me say this before. I hear so many authors who say, if my book can just help one person. And
yeah.
You spend a lot of time and energy and inner work on writing your book. Let it help lots of people. And I love your vision, Andre, millions. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Beautiful. And that's the first place to stand. Like, let your book help millions, right?
Yep.
And so, Andre, if I can just personally coach you, the game you want to be playing, Andre, is, get out there and meet the other influential people that are teaching similar things to you, or even just in the same audience as you. This is where you really got to give up the paradigm of competition. And I can tell you've done a lot of self-work, Andre, or you wouldn't be at this level. So I'm now, I'm preaching to the converted, because I get a lot of the people on the call already get this, but you really want to give up any notion that you're in competition with other people who teach similar things to you or teach to the similar audience. No, they're your best allies. When you get out there and really support them, then when it comes time for launching your book, you'll have a lot more people, chomping at the bit to create energy around what you're doing. So help the other influencers first, and that will be what gets your book out to the audience. Which brings me to my next slide. Thank you for segueing us, Andre. I love it having people on the call live, because this just makes it so much more fun. But let's talk about what makes a best-selling book. And I mentioned it already, but a best-selling book is nothing but a word-of-mouth epidemic around your book, right? But there's a lot of misconceptions around what makes a book a bestseller. There's two distinct schools of thought you'll find in the publishing industry on what makes a book a bestseller. In the self-publishing industry, you'll hear a lot of people say, after you've sold a certain number of books, that your book is automatically a bestseller. The challenge with that paradigm is that nobody agrees on what the number of books is. Like, I've heard people say 1,000, 2,000, 6,000 books. Apparently in Canada, we have our own number, and nobody agrees on what that number is either. But the challenge with using that system is the mainstream publishing industry uses a whole different paradigm of what makes a best-selling book. In the mainstream publishing industry, I'm talking about the big publishing houses, to be a bestseller, you have to be on one of the best-selling lists. In North America, the 5 big ones are New York Times, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, and Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. And you need to hit one of those lists to be considering a bestseller book. And if you use the other paradigm and you're talking to a publisher or anyone in the mainstream publishing industry, and you say, I have a book that's a bestseller because I sold 1,000 books, to them, that's like announcing that you're a newbie that doesn't get the sport we're playing. It's sort of like showing up at the hockey rink with a basketball and expecting people to take you seriously. So I'm going to encourage you to not use the first system of saying a certain number of books makes a best-selling book, and that it means you need to be on one of those lists. Now, that having said, there tends to be a range of how many books you need to sell to get on those lists. And so the first thing I want to say is, if you're launching your book anytime starting at the US Thanksgiving, I'm mostly speaking to the North Americans, but this tends to apply in international countries as well, because I know we've got people from Europe and Canada and Australia on the call listening. But anytime from around the 3rd week of November up to about the week after Christmas or the 1st week in January, the number of books sold in that period of time is exponentially greater than, in fact, there's a lot of people, experts, who will say there's more books sold in that window than the rest of the year combined. So just know the way the lists work, to get on any of those lists, each of those lists has an algorithm, and it's the most books sold over whatever period of time that that list records in the channels that list records. So of course, if you're on Amazon, it's the most books sold. And, you know, nobody knows what Amazon's algorithm is, but it's something like the most books sold overall times most books sold in the last week times the most books sold in the last hour. Amazon actually updates their list every hour. New York Times is kind of considered the gold medal, the Olympic gold medal of bestseller lists, because to get on New York Times, they have the least number of slots, because it's only 15 books that New York Times will report, whereas most of the other lists report up to 100 books. But New York Times only gives the top 15 books. Their categories are much broader than any of the other books. In other words, New York Times, for example, does all business books together, where most of the other lists will separate marketing books from, you know, leadership books, etc. But New York Times also records all books sold in all channels in North America. So they take all the sales on Amazon, Barnes, all the major bookstores, as well as 200 independent points of distribution, which nobody knows where they are, but anyone in the industry can tend to guess. So, you know, basically you're looking at a lot of books sold in a very tight window. If you go into that Christmas book buying window, you're basically having to sell exponentially more books. So generally, I would not recommend launching your book during that window if you want to hit the bestseller list, unless you're already iconic in your industry. And I know there's a few people on the call listening that actually already have several best-selling books. You might be able to do it, but if you're new, you don't want to be going into that window, because you'll be competing, you know, it's like the competition of the year, and you're up against people who are usually multi-time best-selling authors launching in that window. And you'll have to, you know, whereas normally, for example, to get on New York Times during the normal book buying period, you're probably, just to get on the list, you know, you'll hear numbers quoted like you need to sell somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 books to get on the list. And to hit number one, you probably need to hit somewhere between 20 and 40,000 books. At Christmas, you're probably looking at having to sell 100,000 books just to get on New York Times, and you may have to sell 250,000 to hit number one. And again, you're shooting at a moving target, because that number changes every year. So I'm just giving you sort of ballparks to give you a sense. So, but that's sort of to give you an idea of how the lists work. Normally what I teach and what I recommend for first-time authors, if you haven't played the game before, make a run for Amazon, because next to New York Times, Amazon is the most widely recognized list in the world. It's recognized all globally. In fact, in Europe and London, a lot of people don't get the stature of New York Times. It's just another list to them. So Amazon can carry more weight in certain areas of the world. Also, Amazon gives you the opportunity to become an international bestseller, a number one international bestseller, because you can make a run in different countries for Amazon. And, you know, that's something that basically requires you to have relationship with influential people in countries from all over the world. I mean, that's one of the reasons Charmaine and I invite people and speakers from all over the world to come to the Global Influence Summit. You know, we've got people coming from London and Canada and all over the US, and even a few people talking about coming up from Australia. So you want to go to those places where you can meet people from other countries, because that helps you put your book onto the international lists. I think I'm just going to move forward onto the next topic, and then we'll stop and see if there's any questions or comments from the chat boards. So we talked quickly about how many books you have to sell. I already covered that. And moving on, how do you get those top authorities in your field endorsing your book? We touched on this earlier, but this is really all about relationship. You got to get out there and meet those people. You know, go to places like the Global Influence Summit, where those top authorities are gathering and being in community and collaborating. You know, join groups like the Evolutionary Business Council, where those top thought leaders are gathering in community, and then you start building relationships with those people. So you really want to figure out who are those top people that you want to get in relationship with, and then find ways that you can start supporting and endorsing and getting their word out to the world. The more you help those top authorities, the more you will come higher on their radar, and the more likely they are to want to endorse you. You know, you can bet if John DeMartini agrees to do an interview for your book, and you're helping him get interviews and shouting him out in places like that, he's going to look at you a lot more closely in terms of endorsing your book than he would someone he's never met that's asking him just out of the blue, right? And, you know, people like John DeMartini or Randy Gage, and I just mentioned those two because they really helped me on my book. They operate on a very pay-it-forward philosophy. You know, 30, 40 years ago when they were starting out in the industry, they had icons helping them. They now turn around and invest in the up-and-coming. But they like to see you understand how the game is played before they do that. So show them that you understand how influence works. I want to turn it over to you for a minute, Char. Is there anything you want to add, or is there anything you want to bring up from the chat boards at this point?
Yes, I've got a couple things to add and some comments. Bob says, hi, Charmaine and Teresa. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Bob.
And Callie, thank you for letting me know how to pronounce your name. I love this. Question is, what could be helpful in deciding the type of book to start with when it comes to bringing out your expertise? I've had a transformational life experience and wonder into reaching out to adults or children first. Wow.
Yeah.
There's so many ways you can go, and there's so many ways you can share your expertise. I mean, I have 3 genres of books myself. I have business books that were for the corporate world. I have children's books. And actually I have 4. I have a memoir that's the On Toby's Terms book that I talked about. And then I have a professional development book. So I think there's lots of ways that you can get your message out there. I know for me personally, having my adult book On Toby's Terms helped me launch my children's book. So for me, that strategy worked really well. What do you have to say about that, Teresa, in terms of the approach there?
You know, it's really important. Like, one of the key principles of influence is that you solve a big problem for the world, and you do it in a very specific way, right? And that's a tough one to wrap your head around. I mean, one of the reasons we have one of the top branding experts in the world, Jerry Foster, speaking at the Global Influence Summit is people getting, wrapping their head around what's your basic brand, what do you stand for in the world, is one of the key things that makes the difference between a successful author or a successful speaker and one who's just struggling and limping along. Yeah. And it's because, you know, if you're generic and you're overarching, people don't know that what you're doing is for them. People want you to solve their problem, their pain, right? So you really got to understand who your specific target audience is, you know? And that's a challenging one to wrap your head around. Like, think about what it takes for a 28-year-old fresh out of Bible college to become globally iconic. You know, of course, I'm talking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? And, you know, he may have stood in the problem of racial inequality. You know, we all know that's what he made his life about, which was the biggest problem going on the planet at the time, right? But he stood in it in a very specific way. When you look at the initiative that made him first hit the global stage as a global personality, his target audience was bus riders in Montgomery, Alabama. You know, he did the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott, gave a lot of influence to Rosa Parks, who was the person who refused to give up her seat on the bus. I know the Americans on the call all know the story, but I'm giving a little bit more detail because sometimes it's not as well known in other countries, and I know we've got an international listenership here. But, you know, the first initiative that took Martin Luther King Jr. into the public eye was a very specific one to Montgomery, Alabama, and he targeted the local users in Montgomery, Alabama, but then pitched and created relationships with international media by taking a really great story, and he helped reporters all over the world get a really great story. So he gifted influence to Rosa Parks. He gifted influence to reporters by helping them do a really good job and get a really great story out there. And that shone the spotlight back on him as a global authority on the topic of racial inequality. So actually, if you want to do something fun, unfortunately, I still can't see the chat board, but whose question was that? Do you mind?
Where was that?
I think it was, I know you mentioned a couple names there, so I'm just trying to remember who the question came from.
Deciding what type of book, that was from Callie.
Callie, okay, so Callie, if you want to have some fun, type in who you think your target audience is, and you know what you think the problem you solve for the world is, or what your stand is, and we can give you some feedback on that and help you hone that in.
Awesome. It's already come in.
Okay, perfect. So can you read it?
I love this. All about action. So
Yeah.
I have a desire to pioneer something that's not quite clear to me. And so I thought by writing my book, that could help.
Beautiful. So what I would suggest, Callie, is because you're general and vague, it's going to be really hard to sell your book. Even publishers want to know, what genre does your book sit in, right? So what I would suggest is that you try on coats. It's an exercise I often talk about. It's almost like we're at Winners together, and you try on some different coats and you look in the mirror and you see if you like that, right? And so some really good questions to ask yourself would be, what are some of the biggest challenges you've lived through? Most people, their own personal transformation happens because they've overcome some personal adversity. That's a great place to start looking. Mm-hmm. So let's say, and feel free to type into the chat board. I'll just get Charmaine to, I don't know whether you want to share your personal details or not, so I won't put you on the spot. But if you do, I'll speak to them. And I'll just get Charmaine to interrupt me. Okay. But let's say you're a survivor of economic downturn and you had to go bankrupt and your house went into receivership. Well, helping people that are going through that struggle because you've overcome that adversity and had a lot of personal transformation because of it, that would be a great target audience for you. Or let's say you're someone who's a single mom and you're raising kids alone, and you might want to write kids books for children. Or maybe you're in the LGBT audience. Sorry, I'm because I don't know which person I'm speaking to. I know a couple people with the name Callie. So I'm randomly throwing out examples right now.
Here it is.
Yeah. Okay.
For example, I had a healing journey that led me towards a discovery of self-discovery, and thus resulted in reversing the condition of cerebral palsy and overcoming.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
wow. Now, see, so that would be a great target audience for you, right? You could be in the overarching umbrella of health, personal transformation around health. You could target sufferers of cerebral palsy or families living with cerebral palsy. And you could write a book. You could either write an anecdotal story that, sort of autobiographical, or you could write a self-help book, the cerebral palsy field guide. I mean, you could come up with a better name than that, but, living with and overcoming degenerative cerebral palsy. Lots of people would be interested in that. So the more specific you make talking about your transformational journey, and I know this is counterintuitive, but the more people you will reach, and the more you target it in, the more easy it is for you to connect yourself with other influential people. When you start growing a massive following of people, either families of people with cerebral palsy or parents with kids with cerebral palsy or sufferers of cerebral palsy, now, any other expert in that field is potentially someone you can build a relationship with. In fact, any expert in the whole field of health is someone you can build a relationship with. Now you can start shouting out their work to your following, helping build their influence. Now you've got all the people you need to endorse your book and help you with your book launch. Exactly. It's really that simple, but it starts with getting targeted and focused.
So there's a couple of comments here I'll add, and then I'm gonna, there was another question that came in. So Joe says that she's done everything that we're talking about and it works so well for her. And Andre says, I really love how friendly you're making this webinar environment. Love your smiles and talks, dear Charmaine and Teresa. Thank you. That's lovely.
Beautiful.
And then we, Callie had a comment around what opportunities does having a book raise, and I think that that's the conversation's naturally progressing there. One of the things that I want to talk about is one of the opportunities is speaking, and that's probably how I've sold the most of my books, and I know it totally supported the bestseller campaigns the bestseller launches and events that we've done. The other piece that speaking has done, though, is it's helped me build my brand, because I have a brand as a business owner and as a speaker. And then the world had to get to know Charmaine as the author, who has a book about a dog, which has nothing to do with what she does in her corporate world. And when Teresa talked about branding and the power of someone like Jerry Foster, who's speaking at the Global Influence Summit. That's so important to brand yourself as an author. But some of the other opportunities that come up from having a book is the people that you meet, the circles that you get to be with and learn from other people. But it also inspires other books, other products. And that's why I love talking about making your book a business. Most of the books that I sell come from me speaking at events or packaging them with registration fees at conferences that I speak at. And my publisher always tells me that for every one book you get into the hands of a reader, whether they download that in iTunes because your book is in audio format now, maybe they download it off Amazon or Barnes and Noble, maybe they're given it as a door prize. Every time you put a book in someone's hands, it helps spread your message around the world. And that pops up so many opportunities: media, guest blogging, participating in an event as an expert. So I would say books provide so many opportunities, wouldn't you, Teresa?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I want to dive into this topic a little deeper, because there's a finesse to packaging out your book. And this is where one of the top mistakes I see people make come up. And I want to speak to it because I know we're encouraging a lot of people to go to big events like the Global Influence Summit. A mistake that a lot of first-time authors make is they just start handing out their book to authorities as a way to build relationship with that authority. And it's a bit too soon to give out your book if you've got no relationship with that person to start with. I like to use the analogy as, giving your book to an authority or an expert in your field that you've just met is kind of like going to the new neighbor in the new neighborhood that you've just moved into and saying, oh my God, you're going to so love my kids. You're going to really enjoy babysitting them, right? It's a lot, so giving your book, it's not that it's inappropriate to package your book or give your book. That's always happening with people you're already in relationship with. So notice that all the examples that Charmaine gave, it would be you use your book to solidify relationships you already have with people. Get the book out there in the hands of people. But when you're building relationships with authorities, and I'm only commenting on this because I know it's one of the top mistakes I see people make, offer them something that's of high value to them first. So if you're approaching someone at a big event like the Global Influence Summit in San Diego, and let's say a speaker walks off on stage, maybe you want to meet Shonda Perrin or Harrison Klein, and you've heard that they reach millions and they're, globally iconic and listened to around the globe. You wouldn't walk up and give them a copy of your book. You'd walk up and say, hey, I've got a podcast. I'd love to interview you on it. Or I know a stage in my city in Sydney, Australia, or London, England, that I think you'd be great to speak on. Can I introduce you to the person who owns that stage? Those are influence building tactics. That's how you get those top authorities knowing who you are, feeling comfortable around you, and then subsequently endorsing your book. So I just want to really comment on that because that one's really such an important item.
It is. Bob had a good comment here I want to add too. Bob says, when writing a book, it's really helpful to know who you're writing for. And I really agree with that. And Bob, that's something that you really excel in. And you speak a lot at events around the globe, a lot of corporate audiences, business audience. And I love how you're constantly producing new content for books. And one of the ways that I know Bob uses his books and how his books create opportunities for him is that he uses his books as a marketing tool. So I know Bob gives out books to event organizers and to conference organizers, but also to corporations. And that results in a lot of book sales. So you want to be innovative and creative and think about what are the best ways for me to reach the audience. And Andre says, how can I get in touch with you if you're willing to coach me in marketing my book? Well, that's a good question. Awesome.
Fun. Leave a comment on our Facebook page for the Global Influence Summit, and we will get in touch with you, Andre. So, yeah, we'd love to connect. We've got loads of resources and other things you can check out. And one of the things I like to be really transparent about is I'm one of these people, because I'm in the infopreneur field, I do a lot of work online. I always try and end my webinars and calls shorter than 60 minutes, because I know that people are 10 times more likely to listen to the record if it's slightly shorter than 60 minutes than if it's 60 minutes on the dot. I don't know why that is, but I just know that it is. And I mention it out loud because I know a lot of you on the line listening do webinars and interviews. So I just mentioned that because it's a tidbit. So I'm going to say, Char, let's go, let's have some fun and give away some stuff.
Oh, I love giving away stuff. So we let's talk a little bit about the Global Influence Summit. We're giving away a scholarship, a $75 scholarship, thanks to some of our sponsors. We have incredible sponsors at this event. I'll actually be talking about how to get corporate sponsorship so that your sponsors can fund your book tours. When we did our last book tour, I had a 32-foot motorhome sponsored so that we could travel across 14,000 kilometers, 10,000 miles. And I had so many other aspects of my business sponsored. So we have sponsors who have now gifted $75 scholarships for you to be able to come to the Global Influence Summit in California. And it's at the Wyndham San Diego Bayside, which is, how beautiful is that hotel, Teresa?
Gorgeous, gorgeous hotel. So book a few extra days to stay, especially if you're coming down from Canada, because this is February.
Yes, a great way to avoid the snow. So we'd love to see you there. The scholarship gives you $75 off the registration. Here's how it works. The registration right now is $297. So you take off the $75, $220, you can come, and here's the best part, you can bring a friend with you, a guest with you, and there's no extra charge for that. We would love to see you there. And here's how you can act on this. We're going to actually put you into action, in influence, I guess we could say, by having you go to the Facebook page. And the event is called Global Influence Summit. Go to Facebook, find that event. You'll see Teresa and I on there. And we want you to start putting into action today what you learned about influence. So go on and share a tip that you learned. There's a registration button there that you can register for the event. We will immediately send you the $75 scholarship back. So that's back in your bank. But we want you, I'm going to let Teresa talk about the next part, how we can create influence around this and really help you out. There's another prize for you.
Yeah, so we're going to do something really fun. If you guys want to play this game, we're inviting you to play with us. If you share information about the Global Influence Summit, so share our webpage, share information about these webinars. We're doing a webinar series leading up to the Global Influence Summit. If you want to find out about them, ping us after the call. We'll make sure you're on the mailing list to find out about these. The more you share, we're going to record who shares the most. And the person who shares the most, when you come to the Global Influence Summit, we're going to give you a couple minutes on stage. We'll introduce you, and you get to introduce one of our speakers. So we're going to create real presence in the room around you while you're attending the event. So if you want to play that game with us, start sharing about the Global Influence Summit, and the race is on.
Thanks, Teresa. We've got a couple comments here before we wrap down. Jean says, hi, Jean. Good information. Thank you, Teresa and Charmaine. I'm really looking forward to attending the Global Influence Summit in San Diego, February 18th and 19th. We can't wait to see you, Jean. That's going to be awesome. And Lauren says, and Lauren's also going to the summit. And she says, this has been great. Hello from Chicagoland. By the way, I love Webinar Jam platform versus some others. I'm in love with it too. How about you, Teresa?
Yeah, this is our first time doing it on Webinar Jam, and I think I'm sold. So thank you, Webinar Jam. It's an awesome platform.
And then where else? And Bob says, Canadians, it's definitely warmer in February down in San Diego. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, no kidding. We're staying an extra week. I'm just saying. Yeah, so it's really been great to be here with you all. I deeply appreciate you spending the time with us this morning, and I look forward to seeing you all in San Diego. Wonderful. And Teresa, why don't you unslide share so they can see your smiling face before we wrap up? Oh, yeah. Let me just do that. I got to come back over here. Oh, and while you're doing that, Anna, excited to attend from Phoenix. Woohoo! Nice. We'll look forward to meeting you, Anna. Great information. We'll see you there. Bob says, might have to fly down to see you both soon. Will it be live streamed?
Probably not. I think we're going to keep this as a live event, and because what we want to do with this event is really have the influence building happening in that room. Is that fair to say, Teresa?
Yeah, you know, live streaming doesn't give you the chance to get in the room and meet. This is going to be a high caliber audience. It's speakers and trainers and writers and podcasters and documentary makers from all over the world coming to this. You don't want to be sitting at home and not meeting these people. That's all I want to say. So just come meet us in San Diego. We'd love to see you there.
We sure would. And lots of people coming on and saying thank you. They enjoyed it. Great information. Thank you all. And remember, the Facebook page is Global Influence Summit. We're going to be going there right after this. And we look forward to seeing you in San Diego. Thanks so much, Teresa, for sharing your wisdom with us.
Bye, everyone. It's great to see you today. Thanks for the great question.
Bye.